Slay Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Happy Friday. Glad you're here. We have no impeachment talk today. Fantastic news. We have to start here. This was AOC yesterday during a congressional hearing.
Ms. Hutchinson, I also want to thank you about bringing up the poverty draft and this idea of a bootstrap. You know, this idea and this metaphor of a bootstrap started off as a joke because it's a physical impossibility to lift yourself up by a bootstrap, by your shoelaces. It's physically impossible. The whole thing is a joke.
Now, she's actually right, in a way. The first versions of that expression come from the 18th century. There was this fictional character. His name was Baron Munchausen, and he was a German nobleman who was famous for telling these giant lies about his grand accomplishments. And in one of his stories, he tells everyone how he was trapped in a swamp and he was able to miraculously pull himself out by pulling his own hair. So he was able to pull himself out of a swamp by pulling his hair, and he lifted himself out of it, right? So a ridiculous story. Now that story came to America, and people changed it to him being able to not pull himself out of a swamp by his hair, but launch himself over a river by pulling on his bootstraps. That's the beginning of that expression. And yes, she's right, it's impossible. It started out as a silly visual. But just as it doesn't actually rain cats and dogs, and cucumbers aren't actually that cool, and there are no flying colors when you pass a test, and cats don't run around and randomly grab onto someone's tongue, AOC is missing the boat with this idiom. There's no actual boat, I want to be clear. It's not an actual boat that she's missing. Alas, that's still the expression. And that expression has changed over time. It started from a foolish thing to a real idea. 1922, there's a book by James Joyce called Ulysses. And he wrote there, he said, there were others who had forced their way to the top from the lowest rung by the aid of their bootstraps. Sheer force of natural genius with brains, sir. It was 1922. 1927. England's Sunday Times newspaper wrote an editorial actually criticizing, in a way, the American ideal, this idea of self-improvement. But the author here, he doesn't say it's impossible to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. He says it's a real thing. This is what he says. He says the bootstrapper, he said everyone here's heard of the American bootlegger, but the bootstrapper is an even greater national figure. Just as the feat of lifting oneself by one's bootstraps is an almost entirely American accomplishment. The great American ideal is that everybody should become something he's not. The great American tragedy is to remain who you are. So the point here, 1927, is that you should, and in America people do, work to improve their life. Now you're wondering, well, where's the criticism from this editorial in 1927 in England? The criticism is, he said the disadvantage of this reality is, he wrote, speaking nationally, he said there are more second-rate people in first-class positions than there ought to be. So the point is, his point is almost, it's so easy in America to pull yourself up by your bootstraps that in the end, it turns out that there's a lot of second-rate people who are actually in first-class positions. Like, I don't know, her? But let me tell you the story of a bootstrapper. Just pick one. We could do millions. And I'm so glad that she brought this up, pulling yourself out of your bootstraps, because we can share a ton of these stories, and they're great American stories, so let's do it. But I'll tell you just one here real quick. Little girl, born in a lower-income Puerto Rican family in the Bronx, grew up in a small apartment in the city, worked pretty hard in school, got good grades, was able to go to college. Her dad actually died of lung cancer when she was in college. She needed to help the family. She became a bartender. Her mom cleaned houses and drove a school bus. And this girl went from being a bartender, and however much a bartender makes, to a $174,000 a year job. And more than that, surely, as she's now a national political figure. And it won't be long until she's as rich as all these other politicians somehow seem to get over the years. AOC is herself a bootstrap story. What is she talking about? She even has like her own whimsical Netflix documentary all about her story. Her own rags to riches story. So the idea of pulling yourself up by your bootstrap, it maybe started out as a silly idea. But that's the point. That's the point. In the rest of the world, it might be. Because it might be still impossible to improve your lot in life in the rest of the world. So the idea of improving your life, if you live in a communist country, the idea of let's say India, geez, that's the most extreme example. If you're born in a lower caste in India, it is impossible to improve your lot in life. Nothing you can do. You might as well be trying to pull yourself over a river by pulling your bootstraps or pulling yourself out of the mud by pulling your hair. It is a ludicrous idea in the rest of the world. In America, it is not. That's why it's an expression. Because here the impossible is possible. Does that make sense? In 1932, there was a magazine called Pattern Makers Journal. 1932. And it says, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, shake off your cloak of indifference, and shake off your voluntary serfdom. Ooh. Voluntary serfdom. What does that mean? What's a voluntary serfdom? Bad life choices. Bad life choices. Now, AOC, the beginning of that clip, she talks about the poverty draft. She said, I want to thank you, whoever spoke earlier, I want to thank you for bringing up the poverty draft. I've never heard that term before. Have you ever heard that? I've never heard it. I had to look it up. It's the progressive idea that the military tries to recruit from poor communities and put, therefore, people of color on the front lines of war to die. So the argument is that the military is racist, that they lie to black people by telling them that there's opportunity in the military and that you should join the military so that you can get out of your condition and go on to live a better life. And that's a lie, they say. That's the poverty draft. I want to play this video here. It's a couple minutes, but it's so good. I looked for little portions to play, but it's too good. We need the whole thing. And last I saw this morning, it had almost 1 million views. So this is our very own contributor right here on the first, Rob Smith. He was at that testimony. He was at that hearing. Here's his message to AOC. And I wish we had a camera on AOC when he was talking, and I wish we knew what AOC was thinking when she heard Rob's story.
My name is Rob Smith. I'm a U.S. Army veteran and a proud black conservative. I grew up in the working class community of Akron, Ohio, and was raised by a single mother who was, yes, on government assistance for a small point in time when I was very young after my mother and father divorced. Although we didn't have much money or access to a whole lot of resources, she worked very hard to provide for her children. Like many who grew up in Akron, Ohio, I attended some of the lowest performing and underfunded schools in the neighborhood. Disaffected teachers would routinely come to class unprepared, and my counselors had little idea of what to do with a student who quite obviously didn't have an athletic scholarship ready and available for him upon graduation. What we did have in our poor working class neighborhood, however, was a strong sense of community and an undying belief in self. The figureheads, parents, and activists of my day always spoke positively of a brighter future, one where they'd have successfully passed on the torch of leadership and hope of opportunity to us so that we could pave the way for additional successes, just like our forefathers and mothers had done for us. That undying belief in the ability for us as human beings, each of us all endowed with great gifts, to continuously improve and better our circumstances in the world around us, is what drove me to better myself and to serve my country. I graduated from high school near the top of my class and decided to serve my country as an infantryman in the United States Army, including a deployment to both Kuwait and Iraq. I credit the time that I spent in the Army with building the unshakable belief that I have in myself that I am not a victim, that there is nothing that I cannot achieve, and that I am in the best place I could possibly be in to do this, which is the United States of America. I joined the military because I love my country and because it offered a working class kid like me the opportunity to see the world far beyond the confines of Akron, Ohio. It offered me the American dream. Today, I'm a political analyst who has provided commentary on several major news networks, including CNN and Fox News. I have met the last two presidents of the United States. I have met ambassadors, congressmen and women, and senators. I advocate for veterans' rights. I protested for the repeal of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell law that barred service for military members who are openly lesbian, gay, or bisexual. I am the first person in the history of my family to receive my bachelor's degree from Syracuse University and also my master's degree from Columbia University. I'm now a contributor to several reputable online resources and will publish my memoir in May. I'm living a life far beyond what my high school education and upbringing would have suggested, and I wouldn't have been able to accomplish any of these things had my mentality and beliefs about self been any different. If I had succumbed to the soft bigotry of low expectations, or to any of the rhetoric from elected officials who wish to substitute the role that strong individuals and communities play in supporting each other with that of an all-powerful, unaccountable, and bloated government, where would I be today? Granted, it wasn't until I started to reject the messages that seek to take control and responsibility out of the hands of the individual and put that into the government that I saw my greatest personal and career successes. Just a few decades ago, such an existence would have been infeasible in the communities where I come from. No one wants their lives dictated by the government. It is the exact antithesis of the values that have and continue to make our country great. Yes, I have family members who remain on government assistance. I have seen firsthand how the government can easily take on the role of father in the household and the destruction and dysfunction that that can cause. After a long and steady drumbeat by this latest flock of so-called progressives, people have unfortunately come to believe that more government may actually be a solution to their problems. A casual glance at the economy under President Trump suggests otherwise. Since his first days in office, the president has worked to unlock the economy by removing regulatory burdens from small business owners and entrepreneurs so that they can continue to innovate in the diverse communities where they live, work, and play. I have seen Black small business owners that I myself patronize thrive in this economy. Objectively, we can see the results. We can see poverty on the decline, the Black unemployment rate at the lowest it's been in recorded history, and the stock market has experienced an unprecedented rally that's undoubtedly been good for the retirements of working-class American families. The proof is right in front of us for all to see.
How good is that, right? I'm reading from the First's newsletter. You can sign up for this newsletter. It's great on thefirsttv.com. And one of his quotes, "I'm living a life far beyond what my high school education or upbringing would have suggested." That's the bootstraps. Oh, but you can't literally, physically pull your bootstrap. Thanks, AOC. Thank you. We're gonna talk to Rob on Tuesday's show. And we're gonna take some time and slow it down, right? When you're at a congressional thing like that, you got 5 minutes to fit your thing and he got cut off at the end. We're gonna take some time, slow it down, hear about his life a little more. But to say there's no such thing as pulling yourself up from your bootstraps, it's more proof, which is another example of the left's deliberate and systematic dismantling of every single American ideal that they can get their hands on. Every aspect of our history has to be removed from like the core of it, like redefining the founding of America from 1776 to 1619. That's the New York Times 1619 project, right? Like that, like when I say rewriting history, the whole premise of the 1619 project, like this isn't my analysis of it, like the premise of it is we're going to redefine the founding of this country to 1619, right? So from redefining our history to destroying the family, which is the core unit of our society, destroying art and education, which is something both of which we talk a lot on this show, all the way to saying that a fundamental, if not the fundamental aspect of the American ethos, which is pulling yourself from your bootstraps, working hard to make good decisions and improve your lot in life, she says doesn't exist. Even when Rob Smith and AOC herself, the truth is right in front of her. I Another example of this with a pretty, read a great article the other day on this point here, that it's a message to people who blame capitalism for their problems. We'll do that next. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Slater Crusaders, we're going to keep this theme going here about AOC's. And well, you know, it's literally impossible to pull up your. Okay, thanks, AOC. But we're going to go deeper than that. I got a hard truth article here from someone I've never heard of, S.H. Shea, C-H-E-A-H, S.H. Shea. She's pretty sharp. I want to hear more from her. But she wrote this great article called Stop Blaming Capitalism for Your Problems. Stop blaming capitalism for your problems. This is what she says. She says there's a problem with the sales pitch. She talks about all the arguments that people make for socialism, right? We've heard them all before. She said there's a problem with the sales pitch. You'll realize how this is a sales pitch, one that preys on people who are bad at making good choices in life. Socialism is sold by convincing the people who have been making bad decisions in their lives that their hardship is due to external factors. Systematic racism, oppression, blah, blah, you name it. It's not your fault, and you just can't help it. It's the capitalist system that's keeping you down. But I can assure you, she says, that the same person who makes bad decisions under a capitalist system will still make the same bad decisions under a socialist system. If they can't solve their own problems under a capitalist system, they will do no better at solving them under a socialist one. Do you disagree with that? Do you find that to be not true? Someone magically going to start making good decisions under a socialist system? Is pretty similar in a way to that one of our favorite Jordan Peterson lines that we've talked a lot about the last few weeks, that you have to get your own house in order before you can go try to reorder the world. And people who are advocating for socialism, they're trying to reorder the world. But the question is, did you get your own life in order at all? Capitalism, you blame it for your current situation. Are you to blame for your current situation? And I don't mean that rudely, I really don't, because it's always appropriate for everyone to assess their own behavior and attitude and how that's working out for you. Let me give you a hypothetical, and it's actually not that hypothetical to a lot of people, maybe you. Let's say there's a person in your life who's been making all the wrong decisions. Wakes up late, goes to work late all the time, bad attitude, uses drugs, sleeps around, wastes money, never saves. It's all the same things, right? We've all done different versions of these things. But then they complain. Can't catch a break. I just can't catch a break. It's so unfair. I got fired again. Why is everyone so mean to me, right? So we all know that person. Now let's say you win the lottery. This is where the hypothetical comes in. So you have all this extra disposable income to help this person out now. So you do. You house them. You feed them. You pay for their doctor's visits. You pay for their education. What do you think is going to happen? Think this slacker friend of yours is going to change their behavior? As this woman says, turn over a new leaf? Or are they going to keep making the same bad decisions over and over and over again? You think magically they're going to start showing up to work on time? She says the truth is the problems in their life come from their own lack of personal responsibility and bad choices, not capitalism. This is pretty similar to what Kobe wrote. Remember, Kobe wrote a letter to himself, to his 17-year-old self. And he talked about, don't give money to people, invest in people. Don't give money to people because you're actually robbing from them. You're taking from them their dreams. You're robbing their ability to work hard for what they really want by giving them gifts. So don't give, invest. I wrote this whole article about it. It's great. It's also why there's so many professional athletes who make millions of dollars and then end up going broke. There's a great ESPN 30 for 30. It came out just maybe 10 years ago. It's called Broke. It's a really good documentary. It's all about this. These athletes who have millions of dollars, and then a couple of years later, it's all gone. Is that capitalism's fault? that the money's gone? Here's the deal. The consequences of the decisions you make, right? The consequences that hit us, that is capitalism, and that's good. And the consequences are a signal, right? It's a signal that this behavior, whatever it is, may or may not be working, or is not working, right? Let me only do the negative. If you make bad decisions and you get hurt by them, that's capitalism working properly. Now, you may not like the consequence, you may not like the signal that capitalism is sending you, but they're good for you. If I choose to go to work late, capitalism sends me a message. My boss sends me a message. This is not good for you. You should show up on time. Is showing up late capitalism's fault? Is the consequences of me showing up late capitalism's fault? No, it's my fault. If I choose to have a bad attitude, I get fired from my job. Is that capitalism's fault? Well, now here's the deal. Would socialism afford me the right to have bad attitude to customers? Yeah, probably, actually, right? Because I couldn't get fired for having a bad attitude. But you should have a good attitude, right? You should have a good attitude to your customers. And that's why capitalism sends a signal to point us in that direction. Does that make sense? Bit of a sidebar here, but we'll bring it back around. So keep that in mind. The same author here, she wrote a great piece comparing the American left to Chinese communist culture. And there's a couple different, I think she gave 5. So the first one was there's no room for different opinions, right? You're in the progressive left, no room for a different opinion. You're in the communist China, there's no room for different opinions. She talked about how both rewrite history, right? Just like AOC systematically eliminating the idea or disparaging the idea, I should say, that about bootstraps, right? One of the main aspects of the American ethos, right? She's scrubbing, rewriting, getting rid of that history. Third one was just cancel culture in general. So there's this Chinese MMA fighter, and he goes around, and for a while he would challenge the top kung fu and tai chi masters, right? So kung fu and tai chi, there's like the Chinese martial arts, right? So you have these national heroes that at the top of kung fu and tai chi, and then this guy who's a pretty good MMA fighter. He's been challenged on all these fights, and they said, no, we're not gonna fight. And then finally they did. All right, so here's a quick video, because it didn't take long, of an MMA fighter fighting the top Tai Chi master in China. That's the end of that. And that's that, right? So there's another video too of the same thing. He does the same thing to the Kung Fu guy, right? Like, what was that Tai Chi guy thinking he was gonna do? That was a national disgrace to the government of China. So the Chinese government has erased that MMA fighter from the internet. It doesn't exist. If you live in China, that guy doesn't exist right now because he hurt Chinese national morale. Now that guy, individually, he actually supports communism. He supports the government, but he's been canceled from China. Just like anyone in the left today or anyone in America today who says the wrong thing, you will be canceled and erased from culture just the same. Another similarity, more relevant to this conversation about money, China and the left, they're both obsessed with class. Everyone is judged, their identity, their personhood is judged based off their own personal wealth. Now in China, you're judged, like the more money you have, the better it is, right? You're judged that you're a higher status if you come from parents with more money. In America, if you come from money now, if your parents have money or worked really hard and gave you a life that you can achieve more, then you're privileged. And that's bad. You're now silenced. You can't say anything because you're too privileged. So it's the opposite, right? So in China, the more money, the higher status. Here, the more money, now the lower status in leftist culture. So they're opposite things, but the point is that you're not an individual. That's the similarity there. You're not an individual. You are to be judged, good or bad, by how much money you have. When in reality, you shouldn't be judged by how much money you have at all. That doesn't define your character. Here's the big one, though, and this one's for AOC. The left today in America and the communists in China, they don't understand the sanctity of ideas. There's an article in The Guardian on the Hong Kong protests, and a Chinese person said, I think what they're doing in Hong Kong, they're fighting for nothing. They're fighting for no reason. He said, I used to go to Hong Kong a lot, but I'm not going anymore. I don't want to get hurt for some stupid ideas. Some stupid ideas. It's sad when you live in a culture or a communist government for so long that the idea of freedom can be dismissed as some stupid idea. And interestingly enough, the opposite can also be true. You can live in a free country for so long, like AOC has, and you can become entitled and spoiled, and can also come to the same conclusion that freedom is just some stupid idea. AOC saying that the idea of pulling yourself from your bootstraps is just a joke. I think the communists in China would agree with that. So listen, I don't worship capitalism. It's not perfect. This is also why we need charity and we need community to work in tandem with it. It's three legs of a stool. But to think that you can crush all three pillars, all three of these pillars, charity, community, and capitalism, and replace it with socialism, that's literally insane. It's doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Give you a last point. Hong Kong. The Chinese government dismissed the Hong Kong agreement. So the Hong Kong agreement was the agreement between China and England that Hong Kong had to keep its system for 50 years. And we're not at the 50-year mark yet, right? China's come in and they're taking over getting rid of the Hong Kong system. So that's called the Hong Kong agreement. The Chinese government called it a historical document that no longer has any realistic meaning. What does the left say about the Constitution? It's an outdated document written by dead white men. Same thing. When you have that much in common with the communists, you should reconsider some things. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, glad you're here. We got to finish up a conversation. I think we started on Monday or Tuesday's show about income inequality. So remember there was a really good demonstration, I should say a really effective demonstration, incorrect and manipulative, yet effective, about income inequality. It was on the CBS morning show a couple days ago. We got some more to talk about it, and it's super relevant now still, especially with what AOC said the other day, that you can't really pull yourselves up from your bootstraps. Let's play the beginning part of it one more time, just to set the stage again.
We have 5 plates.
Alrighty.
This represents everybody in America.
Okay.
So you've got your wealthiest 20% all the way down to your poorest 20%. And that is the American pie.
The pie itself represents about $98 trillion of household wealth in America. We asked people to dole it out as accurately as possible.
I guess start off with 2 slices.
On the
Here?
wealthiest? Okay.
Yeah.
How many pieces of the pie would you put on the middle class?
Put 4.
4, all right. That's the middle class.
Let's do half a piece to the poorest.
Like right in the middle there?
Yep.
Okay.
Perfect.
So are you going to have to move some of the wealthiest to the lower class?
How much?
2 pieces.
To the lower middle?
Lower
Okay.
middle class.
Okay. So can I show you what
Yes.
reality looks like?
Not like this, obviously.
Unfortunately not.
No one was even close.
So it's actually 9 pieces of pie.
Wow.
Yeah. 90% of the wealth is right here in the top.
That's terrible.
Now, the upper middle class and the middle class, they share 1 piece. So these guys, they've got about 80% of a piece. They get 20% of a piece. And then the lower middle class, they've got 0.3% of a piece. Yeah, they have some crumbs there. There you go. That's what they get. And the poorest, they have no pie. In fact, they have less than no pie. They actually have a bill for pie. They're in pie debt. They owe pie.
People in the poorest 20% are, on average, more than $6,000 in debt.
like 5 times, and I never picked up on the first time when he says the actual numbers. And I'm not contesting the numbers. For the sake of our conversation, we're just going to assume that that's all accurate. But the woman says, terrible. Why? Why is it terrible that 90% of the wealth is in the richest 20%? Why? So earlier in the week, we made 2 points. We talked about envy, and that demonstration only exists to prey on your envy, to make you more envious of people. It does not put you in a state of gratitude. No one watches that and is more grateful for what they have. It makes you full of envy. And once a politician can make you envious of someone, then you're hooked. Don't let people manipulate you with emotion. That was the first point we made. Second point, we talked about proper perspective in that demonstration. And this speaks more to that woman who said, that's terrible. Each crumb today, right, the crumb on one of those plates, that crumb represents a standard of living that is light years better than a crumb 50 years ago. And it's on a different planet from poverty around the world. So that crumb, if you compare it to that guy, it's nothing. But if you compare that crumb to what that crumb was 50 years ago or what that crumb is around the world, you're one of the richest people ever. And that's why we highlighted the website globalrichlist.com. Go check it out, type in your income, and you can see that you are probably in the top 2% wealthiest people in the world. Okay. That's just a rehash of what we did earlier in the week. I got 2 more points. First, what that demonstration does not even begin to discuss is income mobility. So that analysis there, it's a snapshot in time, and it only looks at groups of people, right? Each plate represents a 20% of the people, right? The poorest 20%, then the next richest 20%, the middle 20%, right? They look at groups of people at a moment in time. It doesn't look at an individual person over time. See the difference there? And you can see how it's incomplete, right? If you just look at a group of people in a moment in time, that is an incomplete analysis. What you really got to look at is an individual person over time. That's income mobility. If you look at a specific person, an individual person over 10, 20, 30 years or a lifetime, you see how that person goes up and down income groups over time. At the top, very few people who are in that top 1% stay there. I'll give you some exact numbers so you know what I'm talking about. I'm not making this up. The top 400 richest Americans, all right, in a given year, top 400. They did an analysis. They looked at that over 23 years. So the question is, how many people over a 23-year period have at one point for at least 1 year been in that richest 400? Does that make sense? So over 23 years, how many people have been in the richest 400 people in any given year? Now, the left makes it seem like the uber rich is this some super elite club that you're born into and you can't get in. It's impossible to get in, and no one ever falls out of it because the rich keep getting richer, right? So you'd think over 23 years, like maybe some people would die, so maybe like 500 people have been in the richest 400 in that very elite group, maybe 500 people. 4,584. 4,584 different people have been in that elite club. And the question is, how many people have been in that club for 10 years or longer? Over a 23-year period, how many people have been there for 10 years or longer? Only 3%. 71% of them are there for only 1 year. And the rest are there for 2 or 3 years, and that's it. And then they drop back out. So the point is, there's a lot of turnover at the top. And while it's true that there's a lot of turnover at the top, here's the key, that principle is also true at the bottom. Very few people stay poor for their entire lives. Very few. As proven by this person from this demonstration that I'm surprised they even put in it.
It's very sad.
Yeah?
It's very sad. It's very depressing. I grew up here.
Really?
Uh-huh. That was me.
Yeah. And now it's not. Right? That was me. Yeah. And now where are you? You look like you're doing fine, right? You're at the mall, so I'm assuming you have some disposable income. You're probably somewhere in the middle class. You're probably in that middle plate there right now, right? So if we look at you over time, we see how your income mobility has increased. So when politicians say that the rich are getting richer, which is true, And they say the poor are getting poorer. Well, that part's not true. The poor are getting richer too, and individual people are getting richer over time. That's the most important part. That woman grew up poor, but if you follow her life, don't look at her income group. Look at her. She is getting rich over time, and that's what matters. So don't get focused on income inequality. No one has ever articulated, why income inequality is a problem. Ever. You'll never hear it. You'll never hear anyone make an economic argument for why income inequality is bad. It's entirely fueled by envy. And the real issue that we need to focus on is income mobility and make sure that that still is high, right? How easy is it to earn money, save money, invest, work hard, find marketable skills, etc. And you need it both ways, right? As we talked about in the last segment, if you make bad decisions and you open a business that doesn't work, or you show up late and you get fired, right? You need to be able to lose income. It needs to go both ways. There needs to be a lot of dynamic movement within capitalism, up and down. Here's my example of how no one's ever articulated an economic argument for why income inequality is bad. This is the very opening of this CBS News piece.
The growing gap between rich and poor Americans is one of the biggest challenges facing the country. Get this, the richest 1% controls more wealth now than at any time in more than a half century. And that's a concern cited by every leading Democratic presidential candidate. And a recent bipartisan survey found that most Americans, 61%, think it's a problem.
It's the biggest challenge facing our country? Why? Because 61% of people say so? Like, how stupid is that? Income inequality, one of the biggest problems in America, because a lot of people say it is. Yeah, but that's not an argument. It's not an argument at all. Give me an economic argument. No one can, because it's not a problem. Last point. This is the anchor at the end of the story, Anthony Mason.
The other significant thing is that gap between rich and poor has been growing consistently for years now.
It has been growing.
So it looks like the playing field is favoring one side.
Anthony Mason has a net worth of $2 million. Now, I'm not criticizing him. That's awesome. I want a net worth of $2 million. It's all good. But don't play the game like you really care. I lied. Very last argument. I want to come back. Enough of the economics of it, right? Yesterday we did a lot of math, did a lot of numbers. That was a lot of numbers right there. I want to talk about the morality of it all. This is the ultimate perspective. This argument, when I first heard this, took any envy that I had about other people's wealth completely out of my heart. Let's see if it does the same for you. We'll do it next. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Slater Crusaders, final segment of the week here. Actually, one quick side point, minor side point before we get on to the big moral analysis here. That guy's analysis with the pie, again, I don't want to argue against the numbers. Let's assume all the numbers are true, but that smallest plate does not include welfare payments, right? So when someone has crumbs, it doesn't include the welfare that they receive in those calculations, which changes things quite a bit here. But anyway, that's it with the math. No more math. I want to challenge the unspoken assumption of that story. First is that there's some sort of alternative to the capitalist system, and the alternative is Bernie Sanders or a wealth tax or whatever, right? Just take that person's money over there and put it over here, and everything's going to be great for everybody, more equitable, with no consideration to the negative consequences of that, right? So that's the obvious one, right? The assumption is, this is bad, let's do something better. There's nothing better, that's it. Big picture. This idea that there's wealth inequality in America, but that the socialist systems, that there's never any inequality, right? If you just do a socialist system, if we do a socialist system, then we'll all be equal forever. You're kidding me? Look at every socialist country. Who's the richest person? Who are the richest people? The well-connected and the leaders. Look at all the dictators in Africa. There's no equality there. The leaders are the richest people there. Who's the richest person in Venezuela? This person right here. This is the richest person in Venezuela. What is she? Is she the head of some major company or something? That's Hugo Chavez's daughter. It's the leaders and the well-connected of these corrupt regimes around the world. They're the ones who are the richest, and the poor people live on literal crumbs. Not figurative representative crumbs, but actual literal crumbs. Okay. I keep saying last point because I could talk about this forever. This is the argument that changed my heart when it comes to this. Because everything I just talked about here, they're academic arguments, they appeal to the brain. But it's not really about the brain. It's about envy, so it's really about your heart. Let's say that Bill Gates has a net worth 100,000 times more than yours. Okay? He has a net worth 100,000 times. He's 100,000 times more money than you have. You feel envious of that, right? Because your brain, I know you're like me, my brain starts thinking of all the things I could buy, I could do, where I could live, the house I could get, what I could do with my family, vacations we go on, trips we go. I think all these things, and then I don't have it, and then I feel bad. That's the whole point of that. But we don't do that anymore. Because I'll tell you what really matters. Bill Gates has 100,000 times more money than you, but he's not going to live 100,000 times longer than you. And he's not 100,000 times happier than you. He doesn't love his wife, or he's not loved by his family 100,000 times more than you are. He's not 100,000 times closer to God than you are. Food doesn't taste 100,000 times better to him than it does to you. Think about it, truly, what are the most important things in life? For you, what are the most important things in your life? Bill Gates does not enjoy or have those things 100,000 times more than you do. He was asked what makes him happy. Bill Gates was asked, what makes you happy? And he said there's 4 things. He said the first is staying true to your commitments. That makes me happy, Bill Gates said, saying true to your commitments. It's great. So being an honest person of integrity. That's an awesome answer to that question. He's not 100,000 times better at that than you are. His second thing was giving generously, no matter how much you have. Obviously, he will give more, but that's not the part that matters. It's the giving that makes you feel happy and content. And when he gives, he doesn't feel 100,000 times better than you do, than we could. Third thing he says that makes him feel happy is taking care of my body. All right? Bill Gates can't work out 100,000 times harder than you. And when he's done after a really good workout, he doesn't feel 100,000 times better. He has 100,000 times more money than you. It doesn't make a difference in that. And then finally, he said the thing that gives him the most happiness is spending time with his family. The time that Bill Gates spends with his family is not 100,000 times more fulfilling than the time that you spend with yours. And these are the things that matter in life. And Bill Gates has no greater leg up on you because he has more money. Last week, it seems like forever ago, but last week was a Super Bowl, right? I don't know if Bill Gates had a Super Bowl party. Probably a pretty lame party, if I think about it. But I'm sure he had the biggest, best TVs and all, the nicest leather recliner that is ever made from the finest, tiger skin. I don't know. But you had more fun. I guarantee it. There's a Netflix documentary about his life, and he was asked what the worst day of his life was. What's the worst day of your life? And it wasn't when Steve Jobs accused him of stealing from him. It wasn't when he had to fork over $1.3 billion in antitrust fines. That would be a bummer of a day. He said, the worst day of my life was the day my mother died. So all the positive things in life, as we just mentioned, he doesn't feel 100,000 times more joy than you feel. He also doesn't feel the pain of loss 100,000 times less than you. Bill Gates' house, 66,000 square feet. All right, that doesn't even make any sense. What could that, what? How do you even walk around that? 66,000, all right? The average home in America is 2,000. So his house is over 30 times the size. So he's sitting in a house right now, 30 times the size of you. I know we all want a little more space, right? But that's a little overboard. He's sitting in this house. He isn't loved by his family 30 times more than you. And he doesn't feel the pains and difficulties of life 30 times less than you. And actually, in many ways, the more money you have, the more stress you have. More money, more problems. How many people are there out there who make $500,000 a year and just crush themselves? There's such a cost to that money, right? They're away from their homes all the time. They're away from their families all the time. They're just constantly working. They're getting heart attacks in their 40s. They're unhealthy and stressed out. Like, what is that? What a call, but they have more money. Who cares? Everyone has their stress. That's my point. So, like, stop thinking that money's going to make your life better and that money's going to take stress away. It won't. The grass is not always greener. Wherever you are in life, you're going to have your own stress and your own problems. And the more glamorous life is not always what it seems. I don't want to get on a sidetrack here, but I'll never forget this. This is what it all came crashing down for me, like this idea of grass is always greener. Hugh Hefner. Hugh Hefner died, I don't know, 4 years ago or something like that. And when he died, the whole thing came crashing down. The whole temple came crashing down. And we learned what a sad and miserable life he lived. And while every man dreamed of the Playboy Mansion, this dream come true utopia, the place turned out to be disgusting and pathetic. It was sad. Everything about it was sad. Everyone in it was sad. He was sad. And I remember I learned about Hugh Hefner's life a little bit when he died. He was deployed with the army, and his girlfriend at the time, who he was saving himself for. He was saving himself for marriage when he got back from the war. So Hugh Hefner, he got back from deployment and found that she cheated on him. And he said that betrayal was the worst thing that ever happened to him in his entire life. He said that in an interview when he was, I don't know how old he was when he died, like 90? So he died, like he said that at like 88, or like right before he died. He said that betrayal was the worst thing that ever happened to him. And then his mom had major issues. His mom never hugged him and never said, I love you. So you wonder why Hugh Hefner had major issues with women and intimacy? And then he went on to make a business out of it and got glamorized and made a ton of money. But I bring it up because he was rich in money and house and women. And he was miserable. We shared the Ben Franklin quote the other day. To be content, look backward on those who possess less than yourself, not forward on those who possess more. If this does not make you content, you don't deserve to be happy. But in this case, maybe what looks like more isn't even more at all. Now I'm a twist on that Ben Franklin. Sometimes I look at the people who have more, and that makes me more content. Right? I get content. You look at people who have less, and you're more grateful. But sometimes I look at people who have more, and I'm like, oh man, thank goodness I'm not there. Because that more comes at a huge cost, and it may not even be more. It may be a giant trick. It's so easy to be envious of people like this, but it's not real. Life's about people. And if anything, having more money makes it even harder to have real relationships. So think about this. When you think of Bill Gates and you start to feel a little tinge of enviness, like this guy has 100,000 times more money than me, refocus on what really matters in life and realize that he doesn't have those things 100,000 times more than you do. Slater Crusaders, have a fantastic weekend, and we'll see you back on Monday. Mike Slater, True Story. Spread the word.